the last point of comparison. Neril did not know that the ship was moving. The records said so, as did the dead voices stored in files no one opened anymore except him. The systems repeated it whenever they calculated drift, heading, relative mass, and consumption, according to the ship they were advancing. But Neril had been born there. To him, movement meant crossing the corridor between the medical module and the control room, placing one hand against a cold wall, passing a sealed hatch. One could move in relation to the floor, in relation to a door, in relation to another body. Outside the ship there was nothing to compare himself with. No stars, no planets, no patches of light. Not even darkness in the old sense, because darkness required something to be absent. If any star still burned beyond the group of remnants to which they belonged, its light could no longer reach them. The expansion of space dragged it away faster than any photon could gain ground. The distant galaxies had crossed the cosmological horizon long before his grandparents' grandparents were born. Then the nearby ones went dark. The large stars first, then the yellow ones. Finally, with the patience of trillions of years, the red dwarfs consumed the last hydrogen capable of burning. The universe had lost contact with itself. Neril did not think in those terms. He knew the collectors had to open every 40 cycles. He knew the capture rings combed the space around dead masses and gathered everything that could still fall. Dust, bare nuclei, particles separated by absurd distances. He knew the material had to be filtered, compressed, and fired toward the reactor in exact quantities. He did not know why too much cooled it or why too little could make it burn. He did not need to. Those born on the ship learned the ship as others, according to the archives, had once learned a sky or a city. Room names, safe routes, the smells of leaks, ozone, tired plastic, recycled water with too many metals. Later came the panels, the restart sequences, and the indicators that always lied in the same direction. The ship was not a machine to Neril, it was the full size of reality. Now that size hurt him. The pain had begun in his bones and then spread toward his skin, his throat, his eyes. Each time he swallowed, something rough scraped him from within. His hands trembled, though not enough to stop him walking. That mattered. As long as he could walk, there were still tasks. 3 hours earlier, he had repaired the reactor's shadow regulator. The name was older than Neril, older than Lyra, perhaps older than the ship. Shadow. A simple word for the most difficult system the builders had installed. At the reactor's center there was no fuel in the sense shown by the old videos. There was no fire, though it produced heat. There was no surface, though it had a size. There was an artificial black hole, created by concentrating light until light could no longer escape the place it occupied. The archives called it a Kugelblitz. Lyra had called it the well. The well was smaller than a cell nucleus and had the mass of a mountain. While the injectors fed it, it remained stable. When it lost mass, it emitted radiation. The smaller it became, the hotter it burned. The hotter it burned, the more mass it lost. Conversion layers trapped part of that radiation and transformed it into electricity, useful heat, and thrust. The shadow regulator moved shields of dense matter around the well, opened channels, closed others, and kept the gamma glow away from everything that needed to remain alive. The regulator had failed anyway. Not all at once. Almost nothing failed all at once on the ship. First, there had been an out-of-phase vibration, then a white alarm, then a red alarm that never sounded because the speakers in that sector had been dead for years. Neril saw it on a side display and ran. The repair had not been complex. That was the cruelty. A mechanical lock, a fractured carbide plate, an actuator unable to close to the correct angle. Neril knew how to fix it. He had done it once with Lyra. Only then the well had been sleeping behind 6 layers of shielding, and there had been enough material to keep it cool. This time there was not. He entered, removed the plate, forced the actuator, bypassed the sensor, and closed the regulator by hand. For 19 seconds, nothing separated Neril from a light he could not see. He did not feel it pass through him. Gamma radiation had no temperature when it entered a body and left no wound that could be pointed to with a finger. He kept working. He secured the lock, confirmed the closure, and left the chamber before vomiting against the hatch. The ship survived. The dose appeared afterward on his wrist meter. A calm figure without drama. The medical system explained that the radiation had broken molecules inside his cells. That part of him would continue dying even if the pain disappeared. It offered 3 protocols: terminal sedation, aggressive support, or monitoring. Nerile chose monitoring because he still had to reach the control room. The system estimated 2 days. Perhaps 3. Nerile thanked the generosity of uncertainty. The well had less time. The collectors had gone 180 cycles without finding enough matter. The ship had reduced temperature, lighting, active memory, and course corrections. It had first shut down the empty rooms, then the duplicate archives, then functions whose names Nerile had never known, all to feed the Kugelblitz a little longer. It was no longer enough. The repair had kept radiation from flooding the ship that morning. It could not stop the well from continuing to shrink. As it lost mass, it would heat up. As it heated, it would lose mass faster. The final part of its life would not be slow. The system calculated 59 hours before complete evaporation. Nerile and the reactor had received almost the same diagnosis. He moved through the main corridor. Only 1 light in 9 worked. On either side were hatches sealed since before his birth. Habitat 1, South Grow, Common Classroom, Nursery. Enormous names for spaces that no longer existed. The ship had once been long, a worm of metal and ceramic made from a mission module and hundreds of habitable modules. In the old representations, it had interior plazas, clinics, storage rooms, schools, and gardens beneath ceilings capable of imitating dawn. If a module suffered irreversible loss, it could separate. If the damage occurred in the center, the ship lost everything behind it. The ship had been losing pieces for longer than Nerile could imagine. Each generation inherited a smaller world. To Nerile, that amputation was not visible. He had been born in the mission module when everything else was already history, abandoned mass, old coordinates. He had been told that at the beginning of his life 5 people still remained. For a while he was the 6th. Then there were 5, then 4, then 2. Lyra shut down 5 years ago. She did not die, Nerile thought. Die was a word from the videos, full of beds, hands, farewells, perhaps ground beneath one's feet. Lyra shut down the way the lights shut down, the way the stars had gone dark, even though she had never seen them either. She had been 32 years older than him. She taught him to read system errors, distinguish an empty pipe by its vibration, and sleep during maneuvers. She also taught him useless words: beach, crowd, bird, storm. Sometimes she projected recordings of water falling from a sky onto the dining room wall. Neither of them had ever felt rain, but Lyra insisted the sound helped keep them from hearing the fans. When her heart began to fail, Nerile tried to repair the medical module. He could not. During her final hours, she wanted to talk. Air barely passed through her throat. Nerile leaned close and received fragments. His name, an incomplete instruction, perhaps the word fear. He never knew which of the 3 things she had tried to say at the end. He watched her open her mouth. He watched her spend in silence, a strength her body no longer possessed. Afterward, Nerile stayed bent over her for a long time. That was when he understood loneliness. Before, he had understood the absence of people. It was not the same. The control room received him with its usual breathing, tired fans, irregular relays, screens adjusting their brightness to avoid spending more than necessary. On a side wall, covered by a sheet of gray dust, was the long-range transmitter. Nerile had seen it all his life without thinking about it. The manuals called it the exterior link system. Lyra called it the old mouth. Neither name made it comprehensible. He had been born in a universe where speaking meant producing sound inside a room occupied by another body. When Lyra shut down, speaking stopped being a practical function. Then, little by little, it stopped being a habit as well. The transmitter belonged to an age when people believed other ships might travel in different directions, that one might find a source of matter, that a signal could cross the distance before distance stopped admitting signals. It did not transmit only with light or radio. A succession of rings ran along the ship's central column, and could deform space in weak pulses, too small to move an object, orderly enough to be recognized by another instrument. For generations, no one had used it, not because of a solemn decision. It had simply lost its meaning, like the simulated windows, the closed classrooms, or the star maps that no longer corresponded to any visible sky. Nerile ran his fingers across the console. The dust opened in a line. The ship was still moving, according to the data. Nerile felt nothing. Now he felt nothing either. There was no course left to correct, no pending destination, no call to return. Only the old mouth preserved by abandonment, waiting for an order no one born there would have imagined necessary. Before activating it, Nerile opened the video. The screen showed colors the ship no longer possessed. A blue sky, a white surface of clouds, people walking beneath a light too large. Then the emblem of the planetary government appeared beside that of Helix Deep Transit, the company responsible for building the migration fleet. The voice was cheerful, clean, almost childlike in its confidence. "The future does not cancel itself," it said. Nerile listened. The video explained that the last long-lived stars were entering their final exhaustion, that the outer regions of the cosmos were already unreachable, and that every delay reduced the few remaining energy sources inside their gravitational island. It also explained the solution with obscene serenity: generation ships, Kugelblitz reactors, dispersed matter collection, self-sufficient modules, sealed gardens, schools, clinics, simulated plazas. Hundreds of ships launched toward the last mapped gravitational wells. If one found a reserve capable of sustaining life, it would call the others. "This will not be an escape," the voice promised, while a family smiled before an impossible window. "It will be the greatest voyage in our history." Nerile looked at the window in the video. Stars were behind it. The file ended with music. For a while, the control room was silent. Nerile thought perhaps his ancestors had been brave. Then he thought perhaps they had only been afraid. After that, he understood there was not enough difference between the two for anyone to care, this late. He activated the transmitter. The outer rings took time to obey. Their supports adjusted through the ship, a succession of muffled impacts Nerile felt beneath his feet. The system opened the available protocols. There were radio frequencies, optical beams, directed gravitational pulses, and greeting packets translated into mathematical systems no one remembered designing. There was also a protocol with no recipient. Conformal continuity, it read. Nerile tried to open it. The console requested a command authorization that had not existed for generations. He entered Lyra's code, then his own. The system rejected both. Nerile left one hand on the reader until the diagnostic identified blood on his fingers, and perhaps through error or machine fatigue, the screen changed. A sphere covered in points appeared. "Explain," Nerile said. His voice came out low. The word burned his throat. The system explained. It did not do so well. It used terms designed for people educated beneath the sky, people who understood cosmological scales, tensors, and conformal geometry. Nerile ordered it to simplify, then to simplify again. The second time, the system erased almost all the equations. The universe would continue expanding. Natural black holes, much larger than the ship's well, would take inconceivable amounts of time to evaporate. Stable matter might eventually disintegrate. A time would come when only radiation and massless particles remained, traveling through space that grew ever more diffuse. Without mass, there would be no clocks. A clock needed something that retained size, something that allowed one instant to be compared with another. Without matter capable of fixing a scale, an infinitely old and empty universe could be described through the same geometric relationships as one infinitely small and young. Distances would change, but angles would not. The end might touch another beginning, not because time moved backward, but because the words large, small, late, and far would stop meaning different things. It was a hypothesis. The archives called it conformal cyclic cosmology. No one had been able to verify it. The people who built the transmitter had not either, but they had calculated that a gravitational wave with a precise shape could cross that boundary of scale. It would not carry a ship. It would not carry bodies. It might not even preserve complex information. In the next universe, it would appear as an irregularity in the first free radiation, a faint mark across a region of the sky that did not yet exist. Neryl looked at the sphere on the screen. The points changed color in a pattern. Can anyone hear it? There are no accessible receivers in the current universe, the system replied. Afterward, the machine took less than a second. Neryl interpreted that as consideration. The existence of a later eon is unconfirmed. The appearance of observers within it cannot be estimated. Preservation of the pattern depends on unverified assumptions. Can anyone hear it afterward? It is possible. Possible. The word had sustained everyone who built the ship. Then it had been reduced by births, failures, sealed hatches, and bodies removed from rooms no longer needed. Neryl did not trust it. But it was the first word he had found that remained open. He selected the protocol. The system displayed the cost. To produce a deformation capable of surviving, the old mouth would need the Kugelblitz's final evaporation. The gravitational rings could take that burst and shape it, but not while the reactor's shields tried to contain it. The shadow regulator had to be opened, all the energy given to the modulators, and the radiation allowed to pass through the ship. Nothing alive would survive the pulse. Neryl looked back toward the corridor he had come through. He had repaired the regulator with his hands. He had received a fatal dose to close it. Now the final task asked him to open it again. He did not laugh. He remembered laughter, but his body no longer found a way to make it. He accepted. The console opened the historical archive. It occupied nearly all the memory the ship still possessed. Maps of destroyed worlds, genomes, languages, machines, paintings, songs, demonstrations of mathematics, records of rain. There were millions of names, voices of people who had died before launch. A girl chasing something called a dog beneath yellow light. Nighttime cities, oceans, wars, recipes for foods whose ingredients no longer existed. Instructions for building musical instruments and recordings of hands using them. Neryl ordered it all included. The pattern will not preserve that quantity of information, the system said. Compress it. Compression does not change the channel's physical limit. The screen displayed probabilities. The complete archive could be transmitted, but it would arrive so distorted that it would be confused with natural fluctuations. A language without a body, a map without shared points, a history broken into fragments without order. Even if future observers found the mark, they would not know how to distinguish it from noise. Neryl reduced the message. He chose the maps and removed the cities. He chose the genomes and removed the paintings. He chose the equations and removed the songs. Each choice felt like a different betrayal. What remained was still too large. He tried the voices. Lyra was not in the historical archive. Neryl had preserved a few recordings, almost all of them maintenance instructions. He found one in which she said his name from the other end of the dining room. That was all. Neryl. He played it twice. Then he removed it from the message. A name was too small a thing to contain a life, and too large for someone who shared none of its words. Pain rose from his stomach. Neryl folded over the console. When he coughed, a dark stain covered part of the sphere. The medical system offered terminal sedation. Neryl refused it. There was still a task. He thought of coordinates, but coordinates needed a shared map. He thought of prime numbers, but the universe produced numbers without intending to. He thought of the shape of a body. Everything said something. Nothing said what he needed. He opened a voice channel. "There is still someone here," he said. The first word barely came out. On the last his throat closed. The record showed a small wave, broken by air and blood. Neryl tried again. He opened his mouth. He pushed from his chest. No voice came. The control room continued breathing around him. Neryl remembered Lyra in the medical module, spending her last strength on a message he had not been able to understand. He remembered the reactor's dead speakers, and the red alarm shining without sound. He remembered the entire ship crossing the darkness without a star before which it could prove that it was moving. He placed 3 fingers on the panel. He struck it 3 times. He waited. He struck it 3 more times. The system drew the 6 pulses. They were simple. They could be expressed as alternating variations in the wave's polarization. 3 crests, an empty region, and 3 crests. The pause mattered as much as the blows. Without it, there would only be repetition. With it, there were 2 groups. 2 things capable of being compared. Probability of preservation, the system said, 4.1% under the primary conformal model. It was the most generous figure Gnarl had seen in his entire life. He authorized the pattern. The ship began to prepare. The console scheduled the transmission for 56 hours later. Gnarl discovered that waiting for an answer and waiting for an ending were different tasks. At first, he tried to occupy the time. He checked the ring's couplings, confirmed the energy route 3 times, went to the store for water and returned with 2 containers, though he could finish only half of the first. Each action left a longer interval before the next. His body was beginning to forget tasks it had performed since birth: closing a wound, retaining fluids, producing blood that served a purpose. At 19 hours, the medical system withdrew its offer of aggressive support. It would no longer extend his survival beyond the reactor's life. It kept sedation available and added partial pain control. Gnarl accepted the second. He did not need to suffer for the task to have value. He slept in fragments on the control room floor. The console woke him whenever a value left its range, or when it stopped detecting his breathing for too long. Twice he opened his eyes without knowing where he was. The second time, he saw the motionless blue sky above him and believed the word sky meant ceiling. The confusion lasted only a few seconds. They were enough to make him feel a new loss. At 37 hours, he played all of Lyra's files. There were not many. She appeared almost always from behind, bent over a machine, listing parts or explaining which indicator was not to be taken seriously. In one recording, she got the name of a tool wrong and looked at Gnarl before correcting herself. Her expression changed only slightly. Gnarl knew something funny had happened because he heard himself laugh behind the camera. He did not remember that laugh. He kept the file open until the system had to shut it down to give that energy to the modulators. At 50 hours, he could no longer stand. He crawled to the central seat, holding onto the console edges, and used the last functional strap to keep his body from sliding. The ship's gravity was barely residual acceleration, but even that weight seemed excessive. Throughout that time, the Kugelblitz kept shrinking. Each minute made it hotter. Each rise in temperature shortened the next minute. The ship and Gnarl were not approaching the end in the same way. He was shutting down by pieces. The well was hurrying. In the final hours, the ship finished preparing. It shut down support for the empty modules, closed the collectors, stopped water recycling, and let the fans lose speed. Each cancelled function sent its remaining energy toward the rings of the old mouth. In the central column, superconductors asleep for ages dropped in temperature. The phase fields aligned. The entire hull became an antenna. Gnarl opened the shadow regulator from the console. In the reactor, the layers he had forced shut obeyed. The new plate moved aside. The actuator turned to the exact angle. Behind it, the Kugelblitz kept losing mass. 11 minutes remained. The medical system insisted on sedation. Gnarl refused it again, not because he believed his gaze was necessary. The transmitter would work without him. The mark would not be deeper for having a witness. He simply did not want the final thing to happen alone. He sat before the console. There were no windows in the control room. Windows were structural weaknesses, Lyra had explained, and besides, there was nothing left to see. Gnarl opened the image of the blue sky from the advertisement on one screen. He froze it before the emblems appeared. The clouds seemed still. 4 minutes remained. As the well shrank, it grew hotter. The emission curve rose. The converters fed the rings until they saturated. Vibrations no living being had felt for generations woke throughout the ship. A corridor lamp burst, then another. The sealed hatches received power by error and displayed, for a few seconds, the names of the places they had protected. Habitat 1. South Grow. Common classroom. Nursery. Then they went dark again. 1 minute remained. He placed his hand on the console. The blood on his fingers touched the dried blood he had left earlier. 2 stains. That seemed sufficient. The system began the final countdown without sound. The numbers descended in one corner of the screen, kept small so they would not cover the sky. 5. The Kugelblitz lost the stability it had left. 4. Its temperature rose faster than the converters could use it. 3. The gravitational rings opened the phase channels. 2. The shadow regulator was fully exposed. 1. The black hole evaporated. There was no sound. The final fraction of its mass became a burst of radiation. The open shields did not try to stop it. The fields gathered it, guided it for a minimal span of time, and delivered it to the rings running through the ship. The hull contracted. The space around it contracted too. The deformation was small to the universe and absolute to everything that remained inside the ship. It crossed the darkness at the speed of light, carrying 6 ordered differences in its geometry. 3. Silence. 3. The radiation reached Gnarl before his nerves could turn it into pain. It reached the archives, the corridors, the hatches, and the image of a sky that no longer existed. Metal became plasma. The ship stopped having rooms. Gnarl did not scream. There was not enough air left, no throat left. No one within the distance a voice could cross. The ship screamed for him. It screamed for Lyra, for the bodies born and extinguished inside its modules, for the hands that assembled the first piece beneath a sky that still had stars. It screamed for everyone who had ever looked upward and mistaken the future for a promise. It screamed too for those who were not yet there, for those who, if time granted anything, would arrive afterward and find in the darkness a nameless signal. It carried no complete history and no guarantee of being understood. Barely a pattern, 3 pulses, a pause, 3 more. A message thrown toward a place that might not exist. For a long time, no one could prove it was there. Perhaps no one ever would. But that chance was as large as the universe.